tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So, yeah, let's start. I'll just start tonight with a poem or a fragment of a poem from Andrea Gibson, who just passed away. This is from a piece called Pole Dancing to Gospel Hymns. Because I don't want to be a witness to this life. I want to be charged and convicted, ear lifted to her song like a bouquet of yes. Because my heart is a parachute that has never opened in time, and I want to fuck up that pattern, leave a hole where the cold comes in, and fill it every day with her sun. 'Cause anyone who has ever sat in lotus for more than a few seconds knows it takes a hell of a lot more muscle to stay than to go. Here it is one more time. 'Cause I don't want to be a witness to this life. I want to be charged and convicted, ear lifted to her song like a bouquet of yes, because my heart is a parachute that has never opened in time, and I want to fuck up that pattern, leave a hole where the cold comes in, and fill it every day with her sun. 'Cause anyone who has ever sat in lotus for more than a few seconds knows it takes a hell of a lot more muscle to stay than to go. So, Andrea Gibson, blessings. Thank you. You know, something's right in the world when, so many days, I'll say ones, but I'll say mine. So many days, my Facebook feed is just, a long scroll of, um, the misdeeds of those in power and people being angry, fearful, sarcastic, wholesome, bitter, righteous, hopeful about that, mostly interspersed with cat pictures and people's vacation in Tulum and whatever, all, and then somebody awesome does something awesome or passes away. Um, and suddenly for a couple of days, that scroll of doom is punctuated by poetry. For the last 2 days, my feed has, every 12th post is a poem or a quote from this beloved poet. So that's hopeful, if there ever was something hopeful in the media world. Yeah. All right. And yay, yeah. Anyone who has ever sat in lotus for more than a few seconds knows it takes a hell of a lot more muscle to stay than to go. So we've just come through Āsāḻhā Pūjā, Dhamma Day, the celebration of the Buddha's first teaching. The Buddha had just come out of several weeks of rest and inner celebration and delight following the experience of breaking through what the poetry of the early tradition calls the great dark. In the poems of the elder monks and nuns, the phrase, "the great dark was torn apart," is a phrase used for the opening to liberation. At the same time, there's a parallel or an opposite image of a light going out, because liberation or nibbana is characterized in simile like the going out of a flame, like the going out of a lamp. And there's the beautiful poem of the elder nun Patacara, whose story is a catalog of traumas, um, lost husband, lost children to death, lost parents, loss and grief and displacement, and eventually loss of her sense of self and dignity and wholeness. And she becomes homeless and rambling and ranting, and but stumbles somehow into the Sangha, into a meeting of the Buddha and the monks and nuns, where the Buddha simply says, Patacara, come back to yourself. And she kind of wakes up out of this trance of wild grieving, and ordains and becomes a monastic, begins to understand loss and death, but does not find her own liberation easily. And her poem in the Therigatha, the poems of the elder women, says, it recounts her doubting herself, and she thinks to herself, I've practiced in a dedicated, sincere way. I've done what I was supposed to do. Why is my mind not clear yet? And in a way, this parallels what happened to the Buddha himself. Right? He had gone forth from home and studied with the best meditation teachers he could find, who taught him to enter states of disembodied emptiness and nothingness. But he found that they didn't actually lead to the liberation that he sought. And then he tried or practiced deeply into the ascetic practices of really torturing the body, and also found that those didn't lead to the liberation that he sought. But in both cases, he pushed those practices as far as they would go. And after pushing the ascetic practices, really causing the body pain, doing self-harm, with the aim that it would lead to liberation, like kind of wakes up from the trance of that one day, and looks at it with a kind of care or compassion for himself, saying, oh, this doesn't work. This isn't leading me to where I want to go. I've tried. I've done the most that I could possibly do in this way. And the force of that, turning awareness on himself, on his own practice, causes him to just drop what he's doing and to kind of reset, and and really feel into like what would work, like what is it? I've practiced as I was taught, and it's not working. And so very famously, he remembers himself meditating as a child in a way that was embodied and easeful, and um, and revives from the memory of that easeful, pleasurable, restful meditation, kind of remembers his way into the practice of meditation that's not disembodied, not void oriented, and not ascetic, but is oriented toward remembering in a very deep way his own past, the reality of his body and his self and his past lives. And this is what brings him to this breaking through. For Patacara, so she has the same kind of thought. She says, I've practiced the way that I should, the way that I've been taught, but I haven't broken through. I haven't attained or found my way yet. And and so the poem doesn't tell us how she found her way to this. The poem simply says, I've practiced the way I was taught and I haven't found my way. And then it shifts right away to her, in a way, going back into the activities of ordinary life. She says, I washed my feet and I watched the water pour down the slope. I went back to my room and I tidied it and, made things neat. Sitting down on the bed, I took a needle and pushed the wick down. So she turns the light out, right? The lamp is a bowl of oil, and the wick is resting in the side of the bowl, and you take a needle and you push the wick down into the fuel to extinguish it. She says, I took a needle and pushed the wick down, and when the light went out, my heart was freed. So there's simultaneously the image of the dark of ignorance being torn apart, and the flame or the lamp of continued burning, like we've been talking about in recent weeks, going out. So going back to this poem of Andrea Gibson, and I think I said she by mistake, sorry about that, of this poem of theirs. Because I don't want to be a witness to this life. I want to be charged and convicted, ear lifted to her song like a bouquet of yes. There can be this temptation in the kind of practice that the Buddha brought forward. It can seem like the thing that's being asked of us is to take a kind of distant witness position. Right? And the teachings on not craving feel like this sometimes, that mindfulness says, oh, just observe, watch grasping and aversion arise, observe the suffering of the world with a kind of compassion, that feels kind of distant, can feel distant. The images of Kuan Yin that say, she who hears the cries of the world while resting at ease. And there can be the sense that she's listening from on high or afar somehow. But the meditation that the Buddha had found and the opening that Patacara found, they both or they're the same thing. They open us to the world in this soft, kind of fleshy, very present, very intimate way. I think when the Buddha feels, remembers his past lives, as he says he remembers, thousands of them, eons worth of them. Like, what must that be like to open to what the world really has been? One way of understanding this phrase, the great dark was torn apart, is to think about the dark as being like the border beyond which we can't remember any further. This amazing thing that the Buddha did of remembering the past lives, I think, is a way of saying that when our hearts are not clear and our minds not strong enough through training, we can only remember a little bit of the world. We remember little bits of our life, and we stitch together a narrative out of that. We learn a bit of what has happened in history, mostly just a very tiny bit. How much do any of us really have a felt sense of what happened, over the last 10,000 years, the last 100,000 years? Little tiny snapshots. But how powerful is it when you get even a tiny bit of information, like you learn about a great grandparent and where they came from, or you get a little snippet of a letter that someone wrote 100 years ago or something, that you're related to or connected to somehow. Remembering our connection to the past is powerful, and of course it's part of what healing means or does. So much of healing is stitching together our little fragments of the past into something coherent, something where we can say, oh, I see myself in that. I understand more about the world in this way. The Buddha says that what he did was remember everything. And this is not a personal remembering, right? He says cosmic eons expanding and contracting, and it happens essentially in a moment or in a few hours of profound mystical seeing. What is that, to remember that much? It's like if we make the heart clear enough through ease and not clinging, it opens naturally to remembering this inconceivably large existence that we've been participating in. To do this, we have to stay, right? As their poem says, anyone who has ever sat in lotus for more than a few seconds knows it takes more muscle to stay than to go. I think part of what the Buddha does in turning away from the practices of resting in the absolute void or practices of tormenting the body, both of those in a way are kinds of leaving, ways to reject the world. I'm either going to concentrate my way into the world not existing, or I'm going to torment my body in a way where I maybe, I'm trying to teach myself no longer to believe in the world and the body and the goodness of things. Part of what I love about Gibson's poems is how deeply they are inclusive of heartbreak and loss and grief. How they're such an incredible um, uh, testament to the kind of flowering of communication and connectedness that can happen when trauma is processed. That even sounds too psychological and dry, but when the world is digested in a way that uh, where there's a kind of wild wisdom. Yeah, uh, yeah, dropped into the chat from Pema Children. Never underestimate the desire to bolt. Absolutely, totally. It's so strong. When I was practicing Zen once upon a time at Bodhimanda in northern New Mexico, um, one beautiful spring day, you know, you can't. It's the kind of day where, like, if you're suffering, it's clearly you because, like, it was just gorgeous. We're sitting, in this like red rock ravine near hot springs. The grass is green, the birds are singing, Zen is beautiful. You're just sitting there in the like, the Zendo with the northern New Mexico breeze just slightly blowing through. Like, like it could be heavenly, but of course it's not. And you are with yourself in the way that you can't avoid. And out of the like utter stillness of the meditation, at one point a student, not me, um asking for a friend, right, not me, but a student, but it could have been me, jumps up from their seat, and then, like, their black robe billowing, they just run across the Zendo, burst out of the door in front of the Jigijitsu, and dash across the lawn. And the Jigijitsu, who's the meditation master, never leaves their seat. So they sit, bolt upright. They don't even flinch. But the shoji, who is the the student master, the one who takes care of the students, uh, jumps up from his seat, bolts across the Zendo, and they're gone. And you know, and all of us, we're trained, right? We just sit there. You keep looking down. Nobody thinks anything, but from like 50 yards down the lawn, we hear this, and later we hear that the shoji had just bolted after this kid and just tackled them. And then 10 minutes goes by, no sound. Everybody's just totally sitting completely still, you know. Um, and then very quietly, with perfect decorum, the front door of the Zendo opens. Um, the shoji walks in, bows to his seat, sits down, arranges his robes. The student walks in, bows to the shoji, who bows to the student, and the student, with perfect decorum, walks around back to their seat, bows to the seat, gets on the seat, and resumes the posture. And we never spoke of it, you know. So, um, other than at the end of the retreat telling the story. But there you go. Never underestimate uh, the the desire to bolt. Um, the Buddha goes to his friends then, and says, I found the middle way to the end of suffering, and it is neither indulging in sensual pleasures, so it's not like giving up on the contemplative life and returning to indulgence. It's not hedonism, and it's not self-harm. And he's particularly speaking to these ascetics that his friends. He says that's not the way, and I'm going to tell you what the way is, and he teaches the Eightfold Path. And so we are invited into this way of being that turns toward the world, that lets the heart be broken. And I want to say broken open. That's the usual poetic way to say it. And I think it's true. that the heart breaks open. But I also don't want to underestimate or gloss over just heartbreak, you know, that one of the reasons we need poets like Gibson is because, uh, you know, is because when they say, my heart is a parachute that is never opened in time, um, like most of us know what they mean by that. And, and, we resonate with words like this and with a poet like this because our hearts are broken. And, uh, you know, because the world is uh, worthy of our grief, you know. Um, when the Buddha remembers all those past lives, I I don't know that there's any way that that can be done without a kind of wild grieving being part of the mix. And maybe this is even the core motivating emotion behind the movement toward liberation. Like the idea is that the Buddha sees the past in this extraordinary depth and then sees or understands how it unfolds, right? Understands how actions lead to results, how actions have effects and lead to further rebirth, particularly unethical action, confused action, and wanting, and then just the deep sense of separateness and individualness and craving that comes from that, how those lead to this continued, rebirth into uh, confusion, and that the natural result of this is not not so much like not wanting to be reborn, but actually that the natural result of seeing all that kind of automatically is not being reborn. Because the thing that has been seen is that uh, the only thing that's reborn is the craving, is the dissatisfaction. There's not something else that gets reborn. There's not a self that's clear, clean, separate that could be reborn. The only thing that's reborn is craving. And it's not even really a thing that's reborn. It's more like the Buddha sees how the process continues to unfold. And it unfolds through this kind of craving, longing, wanting. And so to arrive at this radical putting down of participation in the drama of wanting and gain and loss, I think to do that, there has to be a kind of reckoning with what it means to participate and a kind of deep grief in how it has been to participate for so long, to be confused for so long. And of course, there's this dynamic where some folks later in the Mahayana will take this very literally and in a way that almost rings out with a kind of attachment dynamic, come up with the idea that the one who goes all the way into this release is somehow abandoning those that have not gone all the way into that release. Almost like saying that, in a bar full of addicts, someone who has completely stabilized their sobriety in a way that they could never fall back into addiction, um, is uh, is in a way abandoning those who are still addicted. I think this gets too literal, you know, to think like, oh, that means this person is somehow leaving and they should stay and be of service. This is the way that the Bodhisattva ideal got interpreted at times in its history. But I think it's more subtle than this. That when the Buddha or Patacara or anyone who sees completely what participation in the addicted world means, that there's not a wild distinction between the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, between, you know, the intention to care for others and the embracing of complete freedom. I don't think they're different, really. That when the heart is fully released, in a way, there's nothing left but caring. There's nothing left happening other than compassion for the suffering, pain for those who suffer. This kind of deep love for the world, right? Because the Buddha's method to get there was resting into the world, resting into the beauty of the world, resting into the body, being present with things, intimate with things. Patacara just washing her feet and watching the water run down the slope, dropping the doubt, dropping the question of, you know, have I done it right? Just letting it go, or somehow being done with that question. And then just going back, setting the room in order for sleep, pushing the wick down, and taking in the darkness with completion now known fully. So, blessings on the anniversary of the Buddha's first teaching to his friends. Blessings to the memory of Andrea Gibson and all of those who weave beauty out of loss and pain. And blessings just to each of us and everyone hearing this in our own griefs for the world. And may our practice be just a light for ourselves and others, and a deep remembering of who we are and what the world is, so that the great dark can be torn apart again and again. Right. I'm pausing there.